Good morning. This is a public hearing of the Committee of the Whole regarding bills number 190, 152, 190, 153, 190, 154, and resolution number 190, 164. Mr. Stitt, please read the titles of the bills and resolutions.
Bill number 190152, an ordinance to adopt a capital program for the 6 fiscal years 2020 through 2025 inclusive. Bill number 190153, an ordinance to adopt a fiscal 2020 capital budget. Bill number 190154, an ordinance adopting the operating budget for fiscal year 2020. Resolution number 190164, resolution providing for the approval by the Council of the City of Philadelphia of a revised 5-year financial plan for the City of Philadelphia covering fiscal years 2020 through 2024 and incorporating proposed changes with respect to fiscal year 2019, which is to be submitted by the Mayor to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority, the authority pursuant to the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement, authorized by an ordinance of this council approved by the mayor on January 3, 1992, Bill number 1563-A, by and between the city and the authority.
Thank you. Today we continue the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole to consider the bills read by the clerk that constitute proposed operating and capital spending measures for fiscal 2020, a capital program, and a forward-looking capital plan for fiscal 2020 through fiscal 2025. We'll hear testimony today from the following city department: the Office of Property Assessment. We have no callbacks today. Not sure that will allow us to have a short hearing process. Maybe not, but we'll see how it goes. Mr. Stitt, the first person to testify is
Mike Piper.
Good morning.
Good morning, Council President Clark and members of the City Council. I'm Michael Piper, the Chief Assessment Officer for the City of Philadelphia. Today with me are James Arrows, Deputy Chief Assessment Officer, and Delisha Wiles, the longtime Office of Property Assessment Administrative Service Director. I'm pleased to provide testimony on the Office of Property Assessment's fiscal year 2020 operating budget. The Office of Property Assessment is responsible for determining the value of all real property in Philadelphia and is dedicated to doing so in a fair and understandable way. OPA's primary goal is, through ongoing assessments, to improve the accuracy and uniformity of all property values and to instill confidence in Philadelphia taxpayers regarding the fairness of the property tax system, as well as the competency and professionalism of Philadelphia's assessment office. In FY20, administration will work to implement the recommendations from OPA's consultant, Robert Glaudermans, in order to continuously improve the quality of assessments. The leadership team at OPA is developing an action plan to quickly implement the feedback it received, add staff and expert consultant capacity, maintain and improve the existing quality of data, and provide more information about the assessment process and assessment performance to the public. OPA has assembled a new unit dedicated exclusively to sales validation. This unit will formally be put into place by the 3rd week of April. While these recommendations are being implemented, OPA will value properties using the ratio trend or trending method to keep assessments closely tied to the market in tax year 2020. In early March, OPA published an overview of the trending valuation methodology, the first of several new documents we aim to share on our website. OPA will also continue to expand the activities and programs provided in FY19. Personal development classes will be added as a lunch and learn option for staff, as well as continuing education training for the evaluation staff and management, leadership training for supervisors, and computer training for clerical staff. The Computer-Assisted Mass Appraisal, or CAMA system, is on schedule to go live in January 2020. In preparation for the new CAMA system, training will be provided in change management and time management for all staff. An analysis of job function, present and future state will support staff will be performed to determine how to best utilize support staff in this new environment. In addition, the administration will manage a project to archive, scan, or dispose of records no longer needed once the new system is implemented. Finally, partial implementation of the CAMA system will allow OPA to utilize the system for the processing of market value appeals in FY 2020, and that would primarily be the tax year 2020 appeals. Moreover, OPA works to maintain a staffing complement in accordance with industry recommendations. According to a survey conducted by the International Association of Assessing Officers Journal of Property Tax Assessment and Administration, the industry standard is 3,000 parcels per agency employee. Current filled positions combined with the budgeted vacant positions at OPA is working to fill will bring OPA up to this standard. We have begun a targeted recruitment plan to fill vacancies for evaluators and clerical staff with qualified applicants at both the entry and experienced levels. The first phase was the revision of job specs and the reclassification of clerical positions and duties. We are now at the sourcing analysis and hope to announce the exam for evaluators during the first quarter of fiscal 2020. Since our budget requests have been submitted to council, I'd like to request that they be read into the record, and at this time, just take the opportunity to thank council for our opportunity to present the testimony, and my staff and I are happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Got a couple to start. So, in your recent deliberation, your office has stated that it will be implementing recommended action items proposed by your consultant in response to the independent audit that we commission, we being City Council, as required by the ABI statute. Can you talk to me about where you are with respect to improvements or recommendations both by your consultant and by the audit? I know we have a series of recommendations that we made available as a part of our audit process.
Sure.
Can you kind of walk me through that?
So we broke out the recommendations that we were provided by our expert, Bob Glaudermans, into about 10 to 12 different recommendations. And one of the first things that we see that we recognize we've needed to do.
Excuse me, who was your expert?
Bob Glaudermans of the IAAO.
Okay.
Right.
Independent.
No, he's actually a professional IAAO consultant.
But I'm saying it's not a part of your department.
He's not a part of our department, no,
Right.
no, he's a consultant.
Right.
And what he recommended were a few things. Number one, when we look at the level of transparency that we've provided the public, we knew we had a long way to go, and what we're looking to do now is update the city's website with information about the OPA's methodology and the appeals process, how it is that we've been doing assessments up until this year, but also including what we've done for 2020 in terms of the trending. We're also looking to implement the recommendation about this, the sales validation, an independent sales validation unit, which would be responsible for validating sales provided to our modeling group for modeling purposes for assessment. Those seemed to be a couple of the more important ones that we thought we could address quickly. He also recommended that we have additional modelers hired for the department. We're in the process of writing up a job description for modelers that may be people that are already working in the assessment field, but more importantly have expertise in statistical modeling. We're also in the process of writing up an RFP for another recommendation, and that was for someone to help us with certain data that we have been remiss in collecting. That is particularly construction class and condition type. Those are sort of the top four that we've addressed so far.
Okay, so let me kind of go over. I'm actually going to skip over the first recommendation that we had somewhat awkward to ask you about that. But one of the things, and this, people that we contracted with, I think, did a pretty good job, Ryan and Associates. So they talked about possibly adding 3 deputy assessors to the mix as it relates to the leadership in OPA. And it talked about a deputy assessor for residential assessments, somebody who's solely focused on residential, deputy assessor for commercial assessment, and a deputy assessor for valuation analysis, because we believe that there should be a singular focus on each of those particular items with a person whose skill set is, at a level that we feel confident that that person can focus on that and come up with efficient and productive results as a result of that work. What's your position on that?
Well, we haven't responded to that because, I understand that that was council's testimony a few weeks ago in another hearing we had in regard to the independent audit, but
you understand why
I
I'm
do.
going to go down this line of questions because
Yes.
our consultants' report showed that OPA, and don't take this personal, was broken in some way, shape, or form. And we suggested a series of audits, and if you're telling me that you guys, there are some questions about, and you got your own person to make recommendations, you understand why some people might not feel overly comfortable with that.
I think one of the reasons that we looked at hiring a consultant is because once we read the results of the Ryan audit, and we know Mr. Ryan, he's a professional, he's also an IAAO person. We have no doubt about that, but nevertheless, there were no recommendations in Mr. Ryan's audit. And we did speak with him, and in which our understanding from Mr. Ryan is that he wasn't tasked with making recommendations. Nevertheless, we took some of the issues that he brought up seriously and wanted to address those in particular.
We did ask him. It wasn't a part of the original scope. So these were not our recommendations. These were recommendations that came from our consultant. Right.
From Mr. Ryan?
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't see him as part of the audit, is I guess what I'm saying.
Telling you now that these were recommendations that came from our consultant.
Okay.
Right.
Well, I guess we didn't address that so much as because we hadn't seen them at the time. We
forwarded them to you at the time of the release of the audit.
We saw the audit. We didn't see his
You
recommendations.
didn't see these recommendations?
From Mr. Ryan?
No, from us, from City Council.
We did.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I'm asking you about your response to the recommendations that we forwarded to your office.
I guess we don't have a response to that so much as what we saw in Mr. Ryan's audit and our own audit.
Okay. So I need not continue this line of questioning because you're telling me that you didn't review it, so therefore you're not prepared to respond to any of the recommendations the council submitted.
Other than the ones I just discussed, no.
Okay. Is the finance director prepared? Since he was also in the loop. And if you don't agree with him, I'm fine, but,
Rob Dubo, Finance Director. I don't actually have them in
You don't have
front of them. I saw them, obviously, reviewed them, but if you want to just ask me about them specifically, then I can answer.
Want me to give you a
I just
copy?
don't have them in front of me.
Pardon me?
I just don't have them in front of me. I'm happy to discuss them.
All right, so the first one, we recommended that there be 3 deputy assessors, and I think you just heard, 1 residential, 1 singularly focused on commercial, and a deputy assessor for evaluation analysis. What's your response?
So there are there are deputies for residential and commercial, and we do think that makes sense.
And they are focused solely on
Yes.
those issues.
Yes, so we think that makes sense, and we do that. The evaluation, we have someone who does that too. So we have deputies in each
So
of
we
those
already have
positions.
them?
Yes, and we think that structure makes
That was
sense.
see, a pretty easy response. I mean,
Yeah, I'm sorry, Council President. I think I must have misunderstood the question. We do have them, of course, yes.
all right. Okay. And then we also recommended there be contracts with outside firms to assist in new leadership. We love our people, our city employees, and I rave about how great we are all the time, because I am one also. But every now and then, similar to when we had to do the commercial assessments a couple of years ago, every now and then we need to reach outside of the government to get some assistance. So will we be looking for any additional, and I actually wanted to talk to you off the grid about an offer of support by one of the major entities in the city as it relates to moving ahead. in
That's
training.
great. We'd be happy to have that
So is
conversation.
that something that,
Yeah, and there is money, additional money in the budget. I think it's $500,000 for outside support. So yes, we agree with that recommendation too.
okay. So one of the things we were looking at, because the audit found, let's see how much time I have. Okay, I'll get to it quickly. Basically, a third of the properties were underassessed, a third were overassessed, and a third were probably within the parameters of the allowed percentage in terms of over and under. For those individuals that were overassessed, that almost 1/3 of properties, what do you tell those people as it relates to their ability to understanding that they have probably overpaid over the last year at a minimum, and maybe even more so?
Right.
What's,
We're always concerned about any level of assessment that, number one, does not meet industry standards, but also in addressing an individual taxpayer's right to have that particular assessment examined. We, number one, make it a point of letting them know as much as we can about the formal appeal process as well as the informal appeal process. And the informal just meaning the FLR in which they can come in and pretty much talk to us to say, this is wrong, it's overassessed, or it's not assessed like our neighbors. The number's right, but it's not uniform. We've addressed that, and I think we've gotten better at addressing the first level reviews over the past, since the inception of AVI.
so that's in the aftermath of the audit? Or are you suggesting that? Because the audit found that there were a significant number of people that had been overassessed. So I guess I'm asking you, how will those people be in a position to either reclaim or to be given an opportunity to have that reviewed based on overassessments? I mean, and that, it sounds like you're talking about moving forward and improving the process, but that could still be at least a year of being overassessed. So,
Yeah, to your point, so there was an FLR process in place prior to the audit, but and we took what was in the audit very seriously, in the Ryan audit, and so we did see that, and in terms of addressing taxpayers who feel as though their assessments were too high or not uniform, that process is still in place for the current year and for future years in terms of the first level review.
What about the past year?
Past year and going forward, yes.
So what? So I see the audit printed everywhere. Third of the properties were overassessed. I believe my property was one of the overassessed because the map kind of showed the areas and the demographics of where the likely properties were that were overassessed. What does the person do?
The person would file the first level review application with us.
Now?
If we change their assessment for tax year 2020, yes. If we change it for tax year 2019, the opportunity would have been within 30 days after we sent the assessment notice.
So they didn't have an opportunity. You're telling me they don't have an opportunity to have the prior assessments addressed. Mr. DeVoe, you seem like you want to jump in.
Ask Mike something.
Right. So, okay, I guess to answer your question in terms of prior years in which they have not filed an application for an appeal, is that what you're
Because they
referring-
didn't know that they were overassessed.
Okay. They would still have the opportunity to file a formal appeal, okay? Going back is for whatever year they feel there was a problem, not an informal appeal unless we change them for tax year 2020 also, but a formal appeal going forward.
At where?
That would be with the BRT, but that would be an additional process in which they would ask the BRT if they could have their appeal addressed even though they're a year late.
Okay, and the BRT's response would be,
That would depend on the particular issue.
BRT? Can you? No, I need you to. I'm just trying to, people need to have some answers.
Good morning, Carla Pagan.
Oh.
Good morning, Carla Pagan, Executive Director, Board of Revision of Taxes. If the board sees a late file appeal where the property owner's 2020 market value is lower than the 2019 market value, I highly doubt they'll have any objection to granting that late appeal and reducing the market value.
So that assumes that the 2020 is corrected.
Correct. We're assuming that the 2020 is correct. Yes.
But maybe it's not corrected because we still don't have in place what we believe to be a system that is giving us accurate numbers.
Well, so when property owners come before the BRT, the board depends on the property owners to explain why they think their value is wrong. So the board will listen to their argument. The only clear-cut examples that we can see are if the OPA has said, oh, something was wrong here, and they've already agreed to lower them. So if it's clear discrepancies, yes, we'll automatically lower. If not, the board depends on the property owners to make that claim.
Okay, is this being coordinated, or are we not supposed to coordinate between the BRT and the OPA? I'm just trying to get some support for a bunch of people.
Sure. So
who,
it's not
based
coordinated.
on an audit, said that you were overassessed. And this is not something I'm making up. These are questions that I got immediately after that report came out, where a third of the residential properties were probably overassessed. So if there's not an ability for some people to get that redressed, then I need to know that. Or if there is there an opportunity? And I'm now dependent on the future assessments that I'm not clear that will be any more accurate than the prior assessment. So that's kind of a interesting threshold for me to reach.
So what the BRT does not know at this point of that map where 1/3 was overassessed, one, how many of those people already filed appeals? I would guess that a majority of those property owners already filed appeals, and maybe they already have relief. But we need that property owner to come to us and file an appeal, make a claim. If they don't say anything, then we don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Has there been any outreach, I guess, from OPA to let people know that they, and I understand from your perspective, you're not really trying to do that, but if a person frankly doesn't know that they were overassessed, and we know, the government, the people that do the analysis and the audit shows, do we help them, assist them in trying to get that issue addressed? Or we just kind of like look the other way?
Yeah, Council President, let me say this, and just to try to answer your question directly. Taxpayers have the same rights now that they've had for years in terms of appealing and going back and filing an appeal for a property in which they now have additional information about the assessment.
How many years back?
Technically forever.
Okay.
But how that decision plays out is still going to be based on the facts, and the facts are property specific. They're not based on, and again, with all due respect to Mr. Ryan, they're not based on what comes out in an audit. They're not based on what comes out in the newspaper. They're based on the facts of the property.
But they're your facts.
Right. Well,
so your facts have been proven to be somewhat suspect.
Well, there are facts that the OPA will assert are true, but then there will be counterfacts that the taxpayer will bring and say, well, we can test that. That will go before the board, or if the taxpayer wants to take it further, to the Court of Common Pleas. That system hasn't changed. So I think what Ms. Pagan was saying, it's not coordinated unless the taxpayer comes in and says, listen, BRT, I want to file a non-protonc petition to have my application accepted as if timely filed. We spoke to someone at OPA to show them that this particular property is vacant ground, and they didn't know it because they didn't see the demolition permit, in which we will say, sure, let them go back and file. I'm giving you an extreme example. But if we still disagree that the assessment on that particular property was wrong, we will say to BRT, when the taxpayer comes in, we will present our side of the testimony. So that, I guess, hasn't changed.
All right. So I can go on with this for a while, but I've been up for 20 minutes, way beyond my allotted time. I will come back and get a little more detail about what can happen for the taxpayer, because I kind of think we are responsible for assisting the taxpayers.
We take that seriously too, Council President.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I know the audit was the audit, the reporting from the audit was the audit. It wasn't what you, I guess, acknowledged. I kind of thought you all did kind of acknowledge it, but I would think that there should be,
Well,
Mr. DeBoe?
I think that we didn't agree with his conclusion about the accuracy of the assessments. We, though, did agree with some of the points he made about where we could make improvements.
Well, you're making improvements because there's a deficiency. You're not just making improvements because you just wanted to make improvements.
That's right. There were process deficiencies, but that's different from saying that we agree with his version of the ratio study, where he said, what he thought was outside industry standards.
Right.
That's what we disagreed with.
Okay. All right. I'm going to come back. Chair recognizes Councilman Greenlee. Sorry, Councilman, being so long. Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Piper, we've talked various times about the CAMA system, when it was coming and all like that. Now that it's coming in January 2020, what would you say, at least the highlights of what the CAMA system will do to improve the system, would you say?
Oh, the CAMA system is in itself not going to make the overall sweeping changes that are needed in the assessment process. What needs to change is some of the processes that the CAMA system will allow us to make changes in. It's automation, but it's not just automation. There'll be a modeling component to it that will be up to industry standards. There will be one particular database instead of what we use now, which is several different ones in which data resides in different silos, resulting in delays in the time that a decision is made on an assessment to the time a taxpayer gets a tax bill. That's going to improve greatly. Go ahead.
So you're talking more like the speed of how things can happen?
That's just one part of it, and that's just
Okay.
a small part of it.
Okay. Because, we've heard a lot about, well, wait till the CAMA system comes and you'll see a lot of differences. That's, I guess, what I'm getting at. Like, specifically, what could they be? You said about speed, being able to do things faster or get the information faster. Is that kind of what we're...
There's a long list. I can have our project manager kind of go over briefly what those things are, if you'd like.
Okay, if you don't mind, yes.
No.
Good morning.
Good morning. Andrea Lahav, Project Manager for the CAMA project. So for the first phase of the project, these are some of the features that will be available. Evaluators will have the ability to quickly add, update, deactivate, and search comprehensive property record information from a single system, which, as Mike mentioned today, it's being done across various systems. They will also have the ability to manage abatements and exceptions in the single system, track and manage appeals in a single system, generate reports and export data far easily than they do today, and use maps to view and search for properties in a given area. So some of the improvements include having a single system of record, full parcel history access, and updated in a single system real time. Instant updates, property characteristics are updated and reflected immediately once the change is made, and a reduction in improvement in the time that it would take to keep data in sync. So having data validation rules would help eliminate any errors such as invalid date fields, et cetera.
Okay, have we ever had that exactly sent to?
Sure.
Could you send that information through
Sure,
the President's
absolutely.
office, just so we're clear? So it sounded like to succinctly say it is, getting it in one system just will make everything
Absolutely.
coordinated better. Is that kind of the best way to say
Yes,
it?
and
Okay.
there is phase 2 and phase 3 of the project, which is rolling out field mobile capabilities. So evaluators would have the ability to make updates in the field, and also the public access component, which would allow the public to file appeals online. And all of that would improve the time and the turnaround times for some of the applications today and the processing of that work.
And just finally, and I know there's a dispute on the accuracy question.
Sure.
But, I mean, is one of the goals is to make the more accurate assessment so you have less appeals
So
and less
it's-
people unhappy?
So today, it's that there is a lot of manual effort to maintain multiple systems and the accuracy of that data. What the CAMA system will improve is the time that it will take to do that, because it's essentially done in the system automatically with validation. There will be, still always effort to manage the data and cleanse the data, but it's today the time that it takes to keep systems in sync with each other can contribute to some of the data issues that are seen, so this will improve that.
Okay, all right, I think I get, but if you could send that information
Absolutely,
through, I
yep.
appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. President, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Squilla.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know we've been talking about this every year, and the CAMA system every year, and it's always going to be ready the next year, but now hearing that even with the system, it's not really going to make much differences in the assessments, except allowing people to view the information in one place. As we did the assessments last year and we saw that there were some challenges, the audit showed there's some discrepancies, or I guess the methodology that was being used could be better. This year, there's been another assessment, is that correct?
Correct.
And how was the assessment done this year?
We use what's called and recommended by the IAAO as a market update through trending, or just trending, in which we looked at some market forces and applied trending factors to individual components of property. And I say components, we looked at style and we looked at locational factors, but that was about it.
Wasn't one of the things that we were to do from finding out that maybe the assessments needed a little more work, that we were going to hold off on doing reassessments in this way, moving at least for this year?
No, actually, the recommendation was that because we did have some improvements that we need to work on and we need to make, and we had to acknowledge those improvements would not be done overnight or even in 1 year, that we should, yes, hold off on doing assessments the way we normally do them. However, we should, and the recommendation was, go to an alternative method, at least temporarily, meaning for 1, possibly 2 years, and trending is what one of those methods.
So-
That's a recommended method.
The trending method looks at sales across the city and then adds a percentage of increases to those properties? How's it work?
The way it works is we look at sales information for a much shorter period. Instead of, for instance, looking 3 to 5 years back to look at sales, because we have to have a lot of sales, because we're looking at a lot of different factors, we look at 1 year's worth of sales. And we look at what those sales indicate in terms of trends, upwards or down, and what percentage based on what the sales information shows us. We, instead of applying those trending factors across the city, like one factor for everything, we tried to drill down to individual, well, not locations like GMAs, but zones of the city, and particularly types of properties, particularly in residential, but also non-residential, and apply specific trending factors to those types of properties.
So, trying to understand for our constituents, when they received the bill last year, they would have appealed that bill. Some of them went to hearings and got reductions. When you trend across that area, do you just raise everybody a certain percentage in that area?
Right. No, that's not what we do. First of all, what we do is going to be on the website in terms of if you know what type of property yours is. For instance, if your home is a row house and you're in Zone A, you'll be able to go on the website and look at row houses for Zone A and see what trending factor we applied to your assessment from last year to see why you got the decrease or increase for this year.
And because we have some people that were increased 100% last year, and this year they're being increased another 10%. And it just seems like, when does it stop? Like, where do you go? And the frustration level is just rampant. And with the audit, when the audit showed that there were some deficiencies, to come back that following year and then use the trending and increase in their assessments again, it just makes the people feel like we don't know what we're doing, and they want us to do something to stop it. So we need to have some type of assurance that these are really market value assessments. And when we're looking at uniformity and houses with same square footage and even land values across the same street with same homes, and everything's different, it leads to the sense that it's just random. And when the people see that, they get very frustrated. And it's on them. The onus is on them to appeal. They have to do the work. They have to do the research. They have to come in front of you. And then when you go there, OPA is supposed to have an assessed value or give the people information at least 4 days before the hearing. They don't even do that. And so the people feel like they're at an unfair playing field. And we need to do something to change it. And what happens, council gets very reactionary. We end up introducing things that may not be right for the long term because we try to protect some of our constituents. That's what's happening now. And so now we got to come up with something to say, all right, we got to do this next, and we got to do this next. We got to figure out how to fix the system. And we've been waiting for the camera system. I've been here since 2012. Since then, there was a temporary system in place that didn't work. But you know, every year we were told the following year it's coming in. And now we hear, even if it does come in, it's not really going to change much. It's just going to make it easier for people to do. So I don't know what the answer is. I wish I did. But it doesn't seem like other municipalities that have as hard a time as us. So what are we going to do to make the people, to get their confidence back that these values are accurate? And is there a way to show them the methodology for coming up with the assessment?
Let me answer the last question first. The methodology is what we will be posting on the website, and it won't just explain how it is that we came up to a trending factor for this year. It will show how we've done it in prior years and how we're looking to do it in future years.
That's going to be that's on the website now?
No, it will be on the website.
All right, so we'll know how, people could go in and factor their own property by looking at that methodology.
Correct. And let me just go back to one other comment you made, Councilman, about the camera system. I know we kind of briefly went over a list of what camera is supposed to do, and I may have focused too much on the idea that our data is in multiple systems. I don't want you to get the impression that what we're saying is a camera system is just going to bring everything into one system, and that's all it does. It does a lot more than that, and I mean, when you said other jurisdictions don't seem to have some of these problems, some do, but I will say one of the biggest disadvantages we've been at in Philadelphia is that we don't have a camera system yet.
I have just one residence. Last year, they went from 453 to 723 last year, and then this year they're going up to another 784. So if you could see that the values are increasing dramatically and people feel like they're going to eventually not be able to afford this, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to them. Both land values went from 136,000 to 217,000 to 235,000. This is not in Society Hill. This is in South Philadelphia. So it's going to make, we as a city need to look at affordability too and how we manage our neighborhoods. And if this is going to constantly keep escalating in these levels, we're never going to be able to get to the point of affordability for people to stay in the neighborhoods that they grew up in. And we need to work with you, or you need to work with us to make it. If not, we're going to be very reactionary, and we're going to be doing things that aren't beneficial to the city at large.
We would agree, Councilman, and right, I know we've had some conversation in the past in terms of what council can do, and I think it makes sense for us to work with council other than have council react in a way to sort of propose something that really does not benefit the city in general or the taxpayers.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning.
Good morning.
I mean, part of this angst that's going on in the city is from the dramatic increases in the assessments over the last year of 10.5% to 11% on average. But in your defense, without lowering the rate, it was really a tax increase that occurred. We had the control of, we could have lowered the rate and have it even, but really this was a hidden tax increase that came through to people with their increase in assessment. Your job is to assess correctly. Our job is to assess the rate. And it's this body's job, if we felt that that was unfair, we could have lowered the rate from 1.4 to 1.35, or whatever we thought was fair. But we didn't do that. And so all I'm saying to you is we want to make sure that you assess property accurately, and then it's up to us to determine the rate. We have that in our control. Other municipalities across the country, when they do major reassessments, they lower the rate. We didn't do that. So in essence, and I go back to what I've been saying the last few weeks, our growth of spending has gone up in 4 years, $855 million, 21%, against inflation of 5.25%. And that's why people are feeling it. I had some questions on the budget and some general questions on OPA. Okay. Your budget for OPA was $13.4 million 2 years ago.
Yes.
And the proposed budget's going to be 17.3. It's a 29% increase over 2 years.
Correct.
And it looks like the majority is hiring more people. Your increase went from 179 in 18 to, I guess, 235 in 20. It's a 31% increase. Does that include fringe benefits and city overhead in those numbers?
No,
Does not.
it does not.
Does not include fringe benefits.
No.
So you're aware that the fringe benefit cost is like 88 cents for every dollar of labor, and the city overhead could be 30 to 34 cents. So when we hire people, just so you're aware of this, when we hire people for $50,000, it's really $115,000, $112,000, and we hire people for $100,000, the hit to our budget is really $221 when you include all the other costs. The reason why I bring this up is because we need to think in those terms because it's the whole budget. We spent 2 years ago, we went outside and hired a commercial firm. I think it was called Hughes, maybe.
ARUs.
Hughes, yeah. Do you any idea what the results were of their contract, what they produced as far as the city was concerned? What did they deliver to us?
Well, I'll summarize and maybe get a little specific. I'm going to ask OPA's attorney, Drew Aldinger, to come up. But I can tell you that we believe it was money well spent. ARUs provide consultant services primarily on the development of assessments and the defense of those assessments at market value appeals for complex properties, commercial and industrial properties, which is their expertise. We are not only having them back, we're looking to either expand their contract or bring in someone else with similar expertise because we believe that helps the city in general have OPA
Right.
apply assessments a little bit more evenly.
But I guess my question, I don't know if you can comment on this, you might not be able to. I was under the impression that there was maybe over $100 million that was found that wasn't being assessed correctly by this outside firm.
I'm not sure where that came from, Councilman Dom.
Do you have any results of that? And if we paid them $500,000, do you have any results of what that produced?
Yeah, I'm not sure where that figure came from in terms of, you mean unassessed property or just property that was underassessed?
Underassessed.
Well, what we did a couple years ago was an overall citywide assessment in which we addressed all properties, and a lot of that assessment focused on commercial and industrial properties.
Well, let me rephrase the question a different way. Before A.R. Hughes was hired, our commercial valuation was X. After they reviewed it, it became Y. What was that difference?
We can find out, and we would actually be looking to see what it was before the 2018 assessment and what it was afterwards, because that's the first year we hired Hughes for. But you did ask in general about the results of hiring the Hughes company, and I asked OPA's attorney, Drew Aldinger, to come up and maybe speak a little bit more specifically, because he's in the
I'm not
appeals
sure you
every
can
day.
comment because I know there's some legal issues going on, so I don't want to put you in a bad spot.
Right.
Sure. So just generally with respect to the A.R. Hughes firm, they play an important role in helping the Office of Property Assessment establish values for the commercial and industrial properties in the portfolio. That's one thing they do. And then separately, they have a separate contract through the law department where they, for any matters that get appealed to the Court of Common Pleas, for any commercial, generally it's for the commercial and industrial properties that get appealed to the Court of Common Pleas. They have MAIs, appraisers, certified appraisers, and they serve as the experts in those cases to really help the OPA have its values defended in those Court of Common Pleas cases. And then for residential cases, there's residential appraisers that do the same thing, so that in those cases, we're in a better position to go in and defend those values at the Court of Common Pleas level when we have these MAI certified appraisers assisting the law department in the defense.
My recollection, there was over $100 million change in the commercial valuations, or $125 million change, when we brought in an outside firm.
Yeah, the numbers are probably true if that's what you're talking. I don't know what the numbers are,
Right.
but certainly they have resources because they don't just work for the city.
No, I know
They're
that, but
a large
look at-
appraisal firm, so they have access to resources
But here's
that
my
we just don't have to help us get accurate
my
values.
point in bringing this up is that here we targeted $500,000 and we sought outside help. We had a tremendous return on the city's behalf, tremendous. And all I'm saying is that type of tool should be used more frequently in OPA, because I think one of the problems is that a lot of that expertise that's needed on the more complex properties isn't in-house. We have to seek it out of house, because these are very complex properties with cap rates and NOI, and just my own personal experience, I've seen what's going on. So the more we can do where we get outside assistance, the more accurate I think our appraisals are going to be.
I think everyone would agree with you, Councilman, that was money well spent for consultants like A.R. Hughes.
And that was a recommendation of council a couple of years ago, so, we definitely acknowledge and appreciate your partnership in this instance.
No, but I guess, I think the council president was, I'm just saying that more of that is probably would be beneficial to help back up your people.
Absolutely, we would agree.
I'll come back. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman O.
Thank you very much, Council President. You don't have to respond. You know what I'm going to say. I'm just going to say it because I really have to say it. There is nothing unclear about this. There was an audit. And whatever anybody's feeling about the audit, it is an official audit of the city government, and it says that the assessments are below industry standard, therefore we can't use them, just can't use them. And the city, by insisting on collecting these taxes, is going to put people out of their homes. The variations are not something that just people can appeal because there's a few of them. They're just all over the place. And most of the people who didn't appeal, they're poor. So they're being victimized that way. I gave an example at our hearing because, yeah, there's something we could do. We have a bill to reject these taxes, as we should. And that example, like many, of two identical houses on the same block on Wyoming Avenue, assessed at $99,000 and $89,000 in 2008. They look just like they're worth $89,000 and $99,000. And in 2019, the one goes down $1,000 to $88,000, but the other one goes to $630,000. And I guarantee you the people in that house cannot pay the taxes. And if they don't, they're going to lose their house. There is no way that we can allow these assessments to stand and the people to be taxed. And I would say underlying this is the gentrification issue. It's not, to me, the fact that we have people moving in and improving neighborhoods. It's the fact that we're taking those assessments and putting them on houses that are nowhere near what they're being assessed at, and then kicking people out of their homes. I have to respond to my colleague, who I respect greatly. There's that word, respect. Councilman Allen Don. We cannot lower the rate. The rate is uniformly increased and decreased. That's what we do. But when you have a house that went from $99,000 to $630,000, you can't lower the rate enough. That's why there's a separation between council that raises or lowers the rate on a uniform basis to everybody, and the administration that does the assessments. It has to be accurate. It's just not accurate. And it's not okay to say, well, we're going to keep on working on this, and people who don't pay their taxes are going to lose their house. You know, it's not a new conversation. We've had this conversation for like 4 or 5 years, and I think everyone is super polite. It's a wonderful thing about civility. I'm all for it. I hope I'm civil. I'm just saying, we have to reject these taxes. It's wrong. They're illegal. They're improper. There is no way the mayor can say, I'm going to collect these taxes. Just reject them. Nothing wrong with that. You made a mistake. I make mistakes. You all make mistakes. You made a mistake. The council did an independent audit. They're incorrect. So reject them. Let's get them right. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
Councilman O, thank you for that passion and statement of the facts on the record. It matters because there are too many families who are in desperate circumstances because of the manner in which our city has tackled this elephant that we're talking about this afternoon. So I need to say publicly, thank you. Your passion is appreciated. To the administration, in the past year, the city has received 20,000 tax appeals out of 400,000 lots. Many might argue an extraordinary number. And there's no doubt due to the mass appraisal of properties. How, or do you, as a matter of protocol, analyze the demographics of the owners who are following those appeals by either neighborhood or size of the assessment increase, race, or income? And if not, how do you tackle appeals? You tackle them as they come in, so it's based on the date that they come in, that they then get heard by your board? Just share with us the protocols and procedures that your office uses.
Sure. And I think that when you said 20,000, so you're referring to the first level review applications that come in, the informal appeals. What we do is, there's a filing deadline,
Yes.
and, usually that deadline is pretty soon after we send out the notices, so we're
Yes.
talking about within 30 days. And we start looking at each individual one based on whether the assertion of misassessment, let's just say, comes under one of the following: either the value is wrong, or it's not uniform, or there's some assertion of an exemption that should be applied that hasn't been applied.
Okay, so stop right there. So someone walks in, they have 20 appeals from 20 seniors from a particular neighborhood. So a professional goes through them, and then based on the type of appeal, it gets sent to a staff or to a stack, or what?
No, let me back up. They're actually assigned to a staff member who is an assessor who's responsible for handling that account right off the bat.
I see.
That's the way they come in. They come in
Okay.
through an automated system, and that particular assessor is notified, these are your first level reviews, these are yours, okay? And then that assessor goes through the process I just described. And I say one of those three because most appeal applications don't necessarily assert one of the above. Many do, which we consider credible. So we have to look at those.
Of
It could
course.
be the assessment's wrong because our data's wrong, or sales information was coming through wrong.
Sure.
But many of the first level review applications come in with, I don't like the level of trash pickup in my neighborhood, that's why I'm filing this appeal.
Wow.
Or I just don't think I should have to pay, or you guys are wrong. We with all due respect, we have to separate those non-credible ones from
Of
the ones
course.
that have some credibility.
Of course.
And the credible ones take us a lot longer to look at. So in some instances, we'll try to schedule an inspection. So
An
those
inspection of the property of the neighborhood?
inspection of the property that's filing the appeal, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so the reason why I ask is, we know that there's a backlog, and I want to be careful how I say this. Are there incentives for staffers who get through X number by certain date in tackling the backlog? Because we have something in government known as bureaucrats, okay?
Sure.
Where stuff just sits on the desk, and the only reason why it gets picked up is because they get calls from neighbors, RCO reps, and/or council members. So what besides getting a city paycheck, what motivates professionals in your department to be efficient and to attack these appeals in a way that's responsible, so that the backlog that we're struggling with here gets eliminated?
Well, number one, the account manager or assessor responsible for handling those particular appeals, that's just one of the things he or she has to manage. So they're doing that while they're looking at sales information, while they're defending market value appeals in the formal hearings. But in terms of the backlog, I would say that the majority of the ones that come in that have sort of non-credible reasons
Yes.
are disposed of rather quickly.
Quickly.
I can tell you what so for 2019, we got about, as you said, about 20,000 first level review applications, and I can give you an idea where we are with the backlog of those right now.
That would be helpful. Now,
Yeah.
when you say 2019, these are papers that were filed in 2018, correct?
Yes.
Okay, because I took myself an appeal for a senior to that office just to see for myself how things are run down there. And I checked with the family, and they have yet to be scheduled. So I did that just as a matter of me learning what happens when seniors who, we care about everybody, but the seniors are struck, they're choking.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're clear, because when you say scheduled, so you're scheduled for a hearing?
Yes.
So that would be a formal application, that's not one of the 20,000. That would be one of the 95 or 9,600
I
that were
see.
filed with BRT. Those are done independent of the way we process the first level review application.
I
And those
see.
they're moving along too, but they have a backlog from prior years. Because there's a hearing for each one of those in which taxpayers come in and present testimony, those are going to take longer.
Okay.
So,
And would it be useful, helpful to have more professionals to tackle the backlog?
yeah, I will say one of the things that we looked at, and this was as a result of what we saw in the Ryan audit in terms of being able to finish the informal appeals before we start addressing the formal ones, because if they're finished and we can notify the taxpayer, maybe they won't file a formal appeal. And we looked at an option that you sort of just described, in which we would have professionals come, just look at all of them, and at least be able to sort out the credible ones
Yes.
from the non-credible
Yes, yes,
ones, so I
yes.
can have my
A real number.
Yeah, a real number, so I can have the assessors focusing on the credible ones.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, and so to the final question, is there a need, do you see value in looking at the demographics of those who appeal? Because we know that activity in neighborhood X may be very, very different from neighborhood Y. And so that kind of information just, I would find very informative.
The information that we track is based on the information we use to assess. And we are not permitted to assess based on demographic factors.
Okay.
And that's just not Philadelphia, that's anywhere.
Okay.
So I could say, we don't track it, but if someone else tracks it, we can probably try to help facilitate an answer to the problem that you just brought up.
Okay, all right then. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
You're welcome.
Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gimm.
Thank you very much, Council President. I have a number of questions that I wanted to ask, which I will definitely get to in another round, but I wanted to open with what I think is the central issue that's in play here, which is, you know, we've had an enormous rift that occurs between our residents and your department, and I think it's our responsibility to try and figure out with your department to make sure that this is a relationship that isn't beyond repair. And so I guess the question that I have for you is, in addition to your work, what is your department's strategy for community engagement, which I think is a key aspect for the public transparency? You know, in the wake of what I might call a debacle about the assessments last year, OPA got more involved with the community conversations that were occurring around the city, but proactively, how are we now engaging with the communities moving forward so it doesn't get to a point where effectively all we were doing was crisis management
Right.
about something after the fact? So how are you, like, to open up this line of questions, what are you doing to proactively reach out to communities and engage them?
Councilwoman Gunn, that's a good question. And I'll be honest with you, I think we've only thought about that in terms of our responses to our consultants' recommendations in terms of what level of transparency we're providing for the public. So I believe going forward, when we provide more information on our website regarding what it is we do and how we do it, I think that's going to, I think it's going to encourage more communication between our department and taxpayers. I think right now what we do, I don't know if you would call it proactive, but I don't think it's crisis management in terms of coming out to community meetings that various council members schedule. We attend a couple every week, all year long.
I think
And-
most of us might have called that crisis management. In part, we were having them because people are so angry. But, you know, again, we can talk about transparency. I have a couple of questions about that. But is there a proactive strategy that you have right now to go out and talk to communities? Like, transparency isn't just about publishing things on a site. It's about engaging the public to restore faith in this department, which is one of the most important in our city. So what have you learned from this past, and how are you moving forward to ensure that we not only just have transparency, but there's an active plan to engage communities to ensure that the department is restoring faith, but also hearing feedback about how to do better.
Right. Yeah. Because we go out on a regular basis all year and not just after the audit or after the assessment numbers are rolled out, I would say that part of what we do, I wouldn't call it crisis management or proactive, because I think what you're saying, and I would agree, that we can do better with communicating with taxpayer groups, and any type of recommendations that you or council could make, we'd love to have a discussion about, but I think that's something we need to think about more.
Okay. So is there a plan to, let's see, what is the plan to, just making sure that if, in case someone else did not ask, will you commit to publicly disclosing the current valuation methodology on a yearly basis?
We will.
Okay. And once CAMA is operationalized, what other things will become transparent? I mean, will become publicly available, around how we calculate assessments?
Our initiative to put things out on the department's website is based on the information that we've seen in other jurisdictions similar to Philadelphia, and what we think would be helpful, but of course it's going to be an evolving process once taxpayers or representative of taxpayers say to us, we think you need to include this or you need to include that, then I think that's ongoing conversations we'll have to have. So there'll be methodology that you just described that will be there. There'll be processes. There'll be more information about filing appeals. There'll be information that would address some of the questions Council President Clark asked initially about what taxpayers can do to go back for prior years.
And is there a plan to publish annual sales ratio data?
Yes, there is.
Okay. Because that was one of the items that was recommended in the audit. Is it your understanding that CAMA will bring more consistency to land value assessments?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Is it your understanding that in terms of land value, will CAMA assist with bringing more consistency to the assessments around land value in particular?
Among other things, yes.
And how, in what ways, so your models right now, they should be considering lessons learned from prior years. And in what ways are the appeals that are happening right now, how are they being factored into future assessments?
The appeals that are filed now and how we're addressing them, how are they being factored into future assessments?
Well, I assume that, any model should consider lessons that are learned. So every time that there's an assessment process, there are appeals that are filed, there's resolution to the appeals.
Right.
There should be some understanding about how the appeals are working in order to assess for the future. So how are appeals and settlements or resolutions around the appeals processes being factored into your future assessment processes, methodology, however you're projecting?
Sure. When appeals are filed, there's an assumption that always there's something we may not know when a taxpayer files an appeal that the taxpayer knows, and that's why they're bringing it to our attention. Otherwise, we would agree. It could be some part of our data is off, so we take that as a learning opportunity. I would say more than anything with the non-residential properties, we get information from taxpayers in terms of rent rolls and income and expense statements and appraisals that help us going forward. If a taxpayer brings in some information as part of an appeal that addresses our assessment and can demonstrate because their rent rolls a lot lighter than we think it is or the expenses are greater, then going forward, we're going to make our assessment better because of that information that came in as a result of the appeal.
Okay, I would just say, because I'm out of time, but I felt like your answer to my first question was wholly unsatisfactory.
Okay. I'm sorry,
your-
what was that again?
I felt that your answer to my
No, the
first...
question, I can't remember the question.
So the question was about the importance of public engagement,
Oh.
given the debacle that
Right.
happened last year.
Right.
So I found that answer to be wholly unsatisfactory, and that one of the most essential things that we have as a government body is to establish trust and faith with our communities. They may disagree with us, which I think is perfectly fine, but they cannot distrust the processes that happen. And if it is clear that that there is a need to restore that faith and trust, that should actually be your top priority. The fact that community engagement is not something that you've considered proactively is of serious concern, certainly for me, and that because mostly all of us here have to bear the brunt of all of that. And we can't, it is essential that we have to do that. I want to work with this department and its future leadership going forward, but it has to start from a place of common understanding that community engagement is a critical aspect of restoration of trust. It doesn't start with formulas. It doesn't start with, with courts or rulings or pieces of paper that get mailed out. It starts with community engagement, and you have a long way to go to, one, even understand that, and then two, to try and figure out the processes that can make it work. Our body is all about community engagement. That's our responsibility. We rely on that, especially when the politics don't work and when we don't have enough money to get the things that we want. But we have to start with the faith of our residents and restore trust in public institutions. And I think that that's why your answer was not satisfactory.
Okay, understood.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Squilla.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I do want to thank OPA for their responsiveness to our office's emails and getting back to our constituents, because that is part of what Helen had brought up about being able to get information to the people directly. And when they do reach out to us, and then your office or yourself reaches back out to them, doesn't make them feel better when they don't like the answer, but it does make them feel better that they feel like people are paying attention to their concerns. And I think we appreciate that and what your office does for that. But what we have a hard time with is still giving them exact information of why the non-uniformity is being associated across the board on certain blocks. And, the only thing we could tell them at this point is you have to appeal that. And even though they go through the FLR, first level review, comes back unfounded or unchanged, and they go to the BRT, some people have received relief at the Board of Revision of Taxes, the BRT. Other people have received relief in the Common Pleas Court because they appealed again. And to have our residents now go in 3 levels of courts to try to fight something to believe that it's fair or not fair is just asking a lot of them. And a lot of our people aren't able to do that. A lot of our folks are struggling just to get by and wouldn't know the first thing about even appealing an assessment. And the other thing is, when you do have an assessment, the assessment that you sent out now, and people are starting to see online for this year, doesn't have a tax associated with it. So it doesn't, even though they see their assessment went up, they don't know what that correlates to until they get their tax bill. And I know we asked last year if it's possible to put what the tax bill would be under the current rate if this assessment were to hold. Is that something that OPA could do?
We did make a decision a few years ago to remove the tax component from OPA's website directly. I mean, there's a link in the system that you can go to, only because we want to keep that line clear between the assessments. And although we understand the tax is directly related to the assessment, we want to keep the line clear in terms of what OPA is responsible for and can speak to.
Understand that, but I mean, in your mailing, in your assessment mailing, when you just give the difference in assessment out, is it possible to add, this is what you paid last year with this new assessment, if the rate doesn't change, this is what you pay? I mean, that would then have the constituent know the difference, what this assessment means to them. Because, again, even we know it because we're involved in the process. Most people don't.
Yeah, it is possible, Councilman, yeah.
Is that something that you would consider doing?
We'll discuss that, yep.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Real quick, following up on that, is that something that could be done by legislation?
I would submit that it doesn't even need to be, but I'm not sure. I don't know.
It's putting a little pressure on you.
Right, no, I got it. I don't think, in this case, I don't think it would have to go that far. I think it's more of a policy discussion that we can have. Yeah.
Okay. Chair recognizes Councilman Down.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a few more questions, just technical, I guess, but I want to follow up with some of my colleagues' questions on the methodology. I think the Philadelphia Code, since 2013, has required OPA to publish its assessment methodology by May 1st. Would it be possible to make available to the chair, the president, from 2013 going forward, the methodology we used to arrive at the valuations?
We can make that available.
Okay.
We not necessarily today, because we're working on a few different things, but we can, yes.
Yeah, whenever it's convenient, that's fine. Okay. Second question, the testimony says that you plan on conducting, I think someone else touched on this, I don't remember who, analysis of job function, present and future, for the support staff to determine how to best utilize the support staff when the CAMA is fully operational.
Right.
And is it your intention to hire people and then conduct the analysis?
No, we're conducting the analysis now. In fact, the idea is our support staff, is that what you're referring to? Our support staff has basically been some form of a clerical title, which will still need some of that, but because of the technical nature, this is a database, but it's much more than that. We're looking for people to come right in the door in terms of support staff that understand relational databases and so forth.
I remember you had a demonstration over Municipal Services Building a few months ago, and I went to the demonstration.
You did.
And what I remember was that it could be a very good tool, basically, to help people gather information, as Councilman Greenlee was talking about. It's really not going to, it may be used as a tool, it may save us some money because it cuts down the amount of time, but I think it's essentially a very efficient tool that they'll have available information on what's going on in the marketplace.
It will. I mean, we focused on an earlier question. We were talking about bringing information from various data silos into one system, but each one of those systems right now are managed by different folks. That in itself is time and resource draining. And for folks not to have to do that because everything is in one system, it makes it easier for us to point things out to say to council staff, for instance, this is where you can find something. You don't have to wait for me to have my IT manager to have time to compile something. It's going to have an organic improvement on our processes with OPA and the city of Philadelphia.
And another question, Plant Moran, it says in your budget, it's a small number, it says $15,000 a year for IT services. Do you have any idea why we're going outside and we can't do that in-house, or what that's for?
Well, Plant Moran was the consultant company that we hired to help us develop. First of all, they developed our needs assessment before we even contracted with the CAMA vendor.
Okay.
And they're more familiar with what we're doing going forward. They also helped us write the RFP for the CAMA vendor that we eventually selected. So they're the expert in this all over the country, and we think that's a small price to pay to keep their services.
We got an email this morning in my office. I'm just going to use this as an example of what people are feeling in the city. This is on Catherine Street, probably in Councilman Squilla's district, where their property values went from 276 in 18, 23% increase in 19, and they just got another increase, 8.4 for 20. So they're feeling these increases. And that leads me to my question of the trending. And I know that you had a briefing on trending, which I went to, and you had mentioned that the trending was, I think, from recollection, we're dividing the city into 16 geographic areas, I think it was?
Very good, yes.
Okay. And if I recall, the trending numbers were going to be about 3% would be the increases, roughly.
Well, the trending numbers, on the one hand, we don't expect to see much as high as what you just described, but they're not the same all over the city.
Right.
Because again, this is not a drilled down, regular reassessment project like
Right.
we would do every year. But I don't want to be held to a particular number, even in one part of the city.
Right. But here's my concern with the trending. I think I asked the question at the meeting. If the city's real estate tax revenues are going to increase according to the budget, I think 3% from this year to next year roughly, and we're using trending as the method. And if there are 16 geographic areas, and I would venture to say that 75% of them or 3/4 of them may have not gone up in value, or some may have gone down. Would that then put an undue burden on the 25% of the areas that have gone up in order to generate that 3%? Could those areas be subject to anywhere from, 6, 10, 12% increases or higher? Because if we're looking to generate 3% in overall revenue, and it's for the whole city budget, and 3/4 of those areas have not gone up in value, that means the trending number, here comes Rob, that means the trending number is going to be on that 25%, unless I'm reading it incorrectly.
Yeah, I just want to be clear. The 3% is the assumption that we made in the plan. It's not a target for OPA. OPA gets values, their job is to get values accurate. So if that comes out to more or less than 3%, that's not their goal. Their goal
Okay.
is to get it right.
I just want to make sure that we're not going to be facing residents who are going to say, I got a 9 or 12 or 15% increase again this year.
So I'm looking at really preliminary numbers. It does not look like you'll see much of that. But that's separate from what assumptions we have in our
I
plan.
understand. Okay. Let me just go back to another statement. Use the commercial firm. We looked up the numbers, just for the record. Good investment. We paid $500,000. They found $8 billion that wasn't assessed correctly and raised it, which generated $112 million. We should be investing $500,000 to generate $112 million every day of the week. That was a phenomenal. I'm pointing that out because there's an illustration here, and that is by asking some expertise on the outside to help us on the inside, there's a tremendous benefit for us in the city to take advantage of that.
We don't disagree with that. We've been using that particular consultant, but we use a couple other consultants, appraisal consultants for the same purpose, and we think it's been very helpful.
But I would even say this, maybe even bring them in on not just commercial, residential.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for everything you're doing. I just want to make one last comment. It's not an easy job to assess $170 billion of real estate in the city of Philadelphia. Because I look at the two biggest real estate firms in the city, which are Brandywine and Liberty Property Trust. Their portfolios are 5 to 10 billion. They spend multi-millions managing that portfolio.
Sure.
So I know this has been a lot of angst going on here, but it's not an easy job, and I think we will appreciate your efforts to get this right.
Thanks, Councilman. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. I am now speaking on behalf of my colleague and friend Eagle, who looks at this issue on a regular basis in his absence, Councilman Kenyatta Johnson. His questions are as follows. The city controller identified in her audit disparities in low-income neighborhoods. Have you ever examined those disparities that she speaks about in her audit? Should we believe the controller is incorrect in her analysis?
We did read the controller's report for sure, and if the disparities referred to the way we assess high-value properties versus low-value properties.
Within the same neighborhood, on the same block?
Right, within the same neighborhood. We do look at that. That's one of the things and we have to determine why that comes out like that. Our ratio statistics tell us that when we're doing a good job or an insufficient job of that. So we look at that. The ratio statistics are our COD, and more specifically our PRD, our price-related differential. We look at that citywide, but we look at in individual neighborhoods too.
Looking at it is one thing, and that's important. Examining it is another. Taking action in a way that benefits those who've been disenfranchised is the ask. And so what happens after you and members of your team look at, examine, what happens beyond that to fix what appears to be unfair and incongruent?
Those are the areas that we do focus on when we see bad numbers in those areas. To give you an example, in tax year 2016, we looked at areas in which our citywide numbers were good, but in some GMAs, our coefficient of dispersion was unacceptable, and that was what our reassessment for that year focused on.
And so do you then go back to those neighbors and realign or fix the assessment?
We look at those areas every year. We look at the areas that our numbers are insufficient, and we make the corrections for the subsequent year.
You do make
Yes.
the corrections?
Yes.
Okay, so can you speak to the percentage of the corrections you make? That information would be exceedingly helpful to district council members who have to defend the actions or decisions of administration officials.
Sure. We can look at the areas in which we made significant improvements to those measurements, and we can gather that information and provide it to council.
I am so certain, in its absence, and probably other district council persons as well, would deeply appreciate that kind of information.
Sure.
As soon as possible.
We'll prioritize that,
Okay.
Councilwoman Brown.
In many circumstances, he mentions that low, and we know this, low-value properties are very heavily over-assessed, and we know that those who are most impacted are seniors. So how do we keep them whole?
Overvaluing low-value properties and undervaluing high-value properties is a task that we're always looking to do better with. And every year, that's one of the first things we look at. Again, it's those same statistics I just referred to, and we do it by neighborhood and we do it citywide. It's a problem that there's acceptable numbers, and we're trying to live within those acceptable, tolerated numbers.
What we know is during public comment here in City Council, every Thursday, we hear of seniors in those communities who are fearful and desperately fearful of losing their homes because of what we're not doing well. Please.
Yeah, one of the relief programs that we offer is a senior tax freeze. So for seniors who meet the income requirements, their tax bill will not go up regardless of what happens with the assessment. So there is a way for them to ensure that they don't get a hit from any increase in the assessment.
And how's that information shared? What's the outreach?
When revenue comes, they'll be able to give you more detail, but they do a lot of outreach on the program, and we can get you participation
So
numbers, because there are good participation numbers
Revenue
for
will be
that.
able to speak to that in greater
Yes,
detail?
they will. They put
Okay,
a high
terrific.
priority on outreach for their programs.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. So, I actually have a whole stack of questions to ask you, but this is what I'd like to do. I think you all briefed our tech staff this morning
We brief tech
on
staff
the new
tomorrow.
assessments, and you'll be briefing the remaining members of council
Tomorrow afternoon.
tomorrow.
Yes.
All right, so what I'd like to do, after we receive the briefing, and give you a chance to read the recommendations, and I ask that you please look at the audit one more time.
Sure.
Our audit, because I'm just not getting the sense that, I know you say you read it, but I need to feel a little more comfortable that, I'm not gonna say it. I would like to have a call back for your department, so we can ask questions based on the new assessments, because I want to make sure that we get in some level of detail the impact. I understand that there are a wide range of potential increases in assessments, some as high as 10% or more in districts that have already gotten a significant bump up in assessments over the past couple of years. So I'm sure those council people clearly would like to have a little more detailed conversation with you about its impact and what we can do to address that.
Sure.
Okay?
Yep,
So-
we hope to provide that tomorrow. you know, that level of
Yeah, I
detail.
want to, that's why I think it would be more prudent for everybody to have their briefing.
Sure.
And can have detailed questions answered, then we come back on one of the callback dates and ask a little more. One thing I would like to ask you to do, and I don't know, maybe this is already the case, with respect to my earlier questions as it relates to those individuals that were overassessed, as Councilwoman just referenced, and a couple of other, Councilman O so eloquently referenced. If you could just provide us with a one-sheeter for constituents, because I know departments, you guys do what you do, your first level of review, BRT, and then there's the court system. Unfortunately, a lot of folks aren't in a position to go to court primarily because they just don't understand that process. If that can come from either finance or somewhere, so it can be given or put on a website, is there a one-sheeter or one
On the appeal process?
for everything?
So I
Not
think what
just-
we
not-
should give
yeah.
you, if I get you something on the appeal process and also get you something on relief programs so people know their options, because
What kind of programs?
like payment plans that we
Oh,
have
we
for
already,
people.
we do that. We do that.
Okay, I just don't want to,
The legal.
I don't want people to be left with the impression
you wanna
that
put them
we're
all on one
forcing
sheet?
people out of their homes.
All right.
That's,
Yeah, I'm just,
yep. But we
people
can get,
aren't as sophisticated as some of us think we are.
yes, so we will get you that.
They need a little assistance. Okay?
Yes.
All right. So we'll get a date for the call back.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
All right. Well, thank you. Good? No other questions? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Council President.
There being none, the committee will stand in recess until Tuesday, April 9th, 2019 at 10 a.m., which time we will reconvene in room 400. Thank you.